Right. Okay.
Yes,
fine.
correct.
Okay.
But it's okay when I present to show?
You will be seen. Yeah.
Right, Faiz, let me know, yeah. Bindu, are we on?
Yes, we are on, but there's a little slag, but we are on.
Faiz, do we begin? Faiz? Are we live? All right. Good morning, everyone, and a warm welcome to one and all. On behalf of Mahatma Education Society's PILLAI College of Education and Research, New Panvel, it gives me immense pleasure to extend a warm welcome to all of you to its live webinar on Teaching for Perspective Change, Embracing Transformational Learning Practices. I'm yours truly, Ms. Namrata Saxena, faculty member with PCER Panvel. PILLAI College of Education and Research, New Panvel, was established in 2007 with NCT recognition, government approval, and affiliation to Mumbai University. It is NAAC accredited A grade with CGPA of 3.31, offering B.Ed, M.Ed, and PhD programs. PCER Panvel is truly a progressive teacher training institute. Today, in this webinar, we have with us our distinguished speaker, Dr. Annie Gray, our respected principal madam, Dr. Sally Noss, heads of MES institutions, all our faculty members and students from PCER Panvel. I once again welcome you all to this session. It's a special occasion celebrating this webinar. Celebrate as each webinar is a transformation. It's a gathering, it's an utsav, a gyanotsav. We are celebrating the teacher, the taught, the future, the today. Celebrating the efforts of those who take care, teachers and the teacher educators, for bringing not just Shiksha and Manoranjan, but Shiksha Ranjan through their transformational teaching practices. So at the outset, with a big applaud for all us teachers and teacher educators, let's begin the webinar. Hosting this webinar live for more than 300 participant registration fills us with pride, and we owe the success to our management of Mahatma Education Society, our dynamic and visionary leaders, Dr. K.M. Vasudevan Pillai and Dr. Daphne Pillai, for being the source of motivation and support for all our endeavors. Dr. K.M. Vasudevan Pillai, the chairman of Mahatma Education Society, is the visionary founder of Mahatma Education Society, together with Dr. Daphne Pillai. He has been the guiding force behind the enviable success of this educational enterprise. Dr. Pillai demonstrates eloquent citizenship as his dreams of an edu nation are channelized by his actions for the best of all in this nation through education. To him, education is the only way for empowerment of India and the platform for building a developed nation. Beyond teaching, mentoring, beyond career building, character building, beyond institution building, nation building, because a nation better taught is a nation better empowered. These are his enduring quotes from his book, Edu Nation. Our ethos in our culture, promoting an ethic of excellence among all, creating imaginative and analytical minds, yet character conscious and compassionate hearts. Mahatma Education Society, popularly known as the Pillai Group of Institutions, has a presence in every important aspect of education. Starting its journey in 1970s, today the institutions are spread over 5 locations in Mumbai and Navi Mumbai and serve over 30,000 students annually. The group employs 2,000 teachers and over 1,500 dedicated staff. Dr. Pillai's journey is best understood through his initiatives in institution building, benchmarking the highest standards of teaching and pursuing a path of continuous innovation and upgradation. The institutions are committed to the broader task of nation building. Mahatma Education Society stands as a beacon for its vision: education is strength and education for all. Today's webinar brings us to such important aspect of human development. Transit to transformation is a very beautiful journey of any human being. Transition is the journey and transformation is the end result. Despite being Arjun, who can hit the bull's eye, he still needed a right mentor like Krishna. But in this journey of transition to transformation, Arjun, being so intellect about his subject, still needed the Brahmastra. So, what is this transformational learning? The study of transformational learning, whether in the classroom or in an organizational setting, requires the examination of basic foundations, systems, and contingencies that unconsciously drive one's attitudes, perceptions, and ultimate decisions, and their impact on the individual, either learners or employees. Transformational theory aids educators in understanding and developing the necessary skills and processes of critical self-reflection, which encourage them to challenge the status quo. More than just a study of a unique transitory movement in education, today's webinar will explore the hidden structure of meaning, how people learn, and how transformative learning leads to change at personal, classroom, organizational, and societal levels. So, on this note, I now take this opportunity to invite our principal, Dr. Sally Enos, to kindly inaugurate this webinar organized by the IQAC of PILLAI College of Education and Research, New Panvel. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Namrata ma'am. A very, very warm welcome to one and all those who are attending this session, and a wonderful day to you. It is indeed a privilege for PILLAI College of Education and Research to host this particular webinar, and I thank God for this opportunity that he has given us once again. And more so with a theme that Namrata ma'am has just explained is very essential and very practical theme, which one and all should understand, because learning finally is all about inculcating, imbibing, and using it in our life. I take this opportunity to welcome Annie Gray to our midst, and I'm extremely happy that Annie Gray is part of this particular webinar as a resource person, as a speaker, and a very, very knowledgeable person and a very practical oriented individual. I know Annie as a very chirpy, risk-taking, bubbly, enthusiastic person, and she has brought about a lot of change within and outside because of her intensity of thought. And speaking to her, you realize how we need to think about our thinking to learn better. So every time you learn something new when we are interacting with Annie. And Annie, I'm extremely happy and I welcome you to our midst. And I'm sure we are going to enjoy the session and we are going to learn so much more and apply it into our life, our work, and our every situations that we are in. Welcome, Annie. I also take this opportunity to welcome all the heads of the institutions who have joined us, all participants who have come across the globe. We have from USA, we have from Canada, from UAE, and it's a real nice feel, along with our Indian counterparts, taking part in a global situation, global information for global application. So it's indeed, I welcome all those who are participating in these sessions. I also welcome our technical people who are helping us out and all the teachers and students who are part of this seminar. So hoping that all of us will gain something new. I once again welcome the entire group and I hand over the session to Namrata ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sally Nos. You are really our transformational guru, leading us from darkness to light. Thank you, ma'am. I now take this opportunity, and it is indeed my proud privilege to introduce to you our distinguished speaker for today, Dr. Annie Gray, Ed.D. She's been an educator for the last 20 years. She has taught at different levels, from kindergarten to college, and has worked in a variety of settings, from special needs children in Abu Dhabi to college students in the United States. In her current position as faculty chair in the College of Education at Concordia University, Wisconsin, she is guiding graduate students as they pursue their doctoral degrees. In addition to teaching, Dr. Gray consults with organizations that are interested in reducing racism and promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion. Dr. Gray gained extensive experience as an administrator and professor while working in the doctoral program at Concordia University, Portland. In this role, she developed and taught research courses, managed and led professional development for faculty chairs, guided doctoral students with their projects. Prior to this role, she worked as an instructional technologist at Emory University and Morehouse College in Atlanta, Georgia. Annie also served as an assistant professor at Spelman College in Atlanta. Prior to moving to North America, Dr. Gray served as a psychometric officer for Emirates Airlines in Dubai and traveled to over 80 different countries recruiting cabin crew, pilots, and engineers. She ran cross-cultural workshops that focused on mitigating stereotypes and biases among employees from different cultures. Dr. Gray has a bachelor's degree in psychology and a master's in counseling psychology from the University of Mumbai, India, and a doctorate in education from Alliant International University in San Francisco, CA. She enjoys learning and developing curriculum that raises consciousness and impacts social change. Dr. Gray lives in Portland, Oregon with her husband Nathan and her dog Raja. Truly a profound scholar. It has been such an illustrious record, Dr. Annie. You're truly an esteemed erudite, and we are so honored to have you as a speaker here for today's webinar. I extend a warm welcome to you once again, and it gives me immense pleasure to invite you for the much awaited session. Over to you, Dr. Annie.
Thank you, Namrata, and thank you. I just want to say hello to everyone. As I just get ready to share my screen here, bear with me. I think we can share. That's right, great. I just want to say thank you to you all, and especially to Dr. Sally Enos for this warm welcome and extending this opportunity to speak with you. I have to start and give a shout out that all my formative education has been in India. And everything I have learned about education and learning has been from so many great teachers who've taught me from K to 12 to undergrad in Sophia College and then my master's in Vidyanagari. And what they taught me along the way was cultural humility, intellectual humility, which is such an important trait as an educator. And I carry that along with me. So I feel extremely humbled and very grateful to be here and be able to share with you some thoughts. I am going to just go over some of my what we're going to cover today. We're going to start with what is transformational learning theory, as Mesro talks about it, then move into elements of transformational learning, and then the 4 components that support transformational learning. Now that's all theory. So if you are a geek and who loves theory, this is the space for you. You're really going to enjoy that. For those of you who may not warm up to it, be patient. The next 2 is more practical ways of how we can support transformational learning in our classroom. This topic is so relevant for our times from COVID, and I don't know if you are up to date with some of the things that are happening here in the US with the death of George Floyd on May 25th. An African American who was killed by police, and this set out a wave of protest which was quite moving and powerful because it raised issues of how Black people in America have been treated. However, these protests have moved from peaceful protests and in many cases moved to violence. I live in Portland, Oregon, as Namrata mentioned, and it's on the West Coast. And here we've had continuous protests for over 100 days. And while these protests again started peacefully, it's now, there is a moment at right now where there are 2 groups, the left and the right, who are having violent episodes where they clash in these protests. And one reason this happens, and this is not to simplify it, but one reason of this happens is people are unwilling to see each other's points of view. It boils down to perspective issues, right? We don't want to let go of our thoughts and ideas. And how do you help both sides to see different perspectives and become more open thinkers so that as a society, we can come together and grow? Come together and grow. So this issue that I just talked about is not just in the US. I think every country faces their own issues. But this talk about transformational learning is we really want to focus on how is it that we can move away from our just narrow thinking to more broad, inclusive thinking. So transformational learning is very popular, and it's, you've heard of transformation, you've heard the term transformation. It's popular because it's one of those theories that espouses that learning is constant and that learners need to adapt as society changes, and that education can influence the social change. Transformational learning is also popular because it's aspirational and practical in that it promotes social justice and provides strategies to counter obstacles for change. Another reason for its popularity is that every time you think of theory of transformation or transformational learning theory, you're also thinking, or you're thinking it's synonymous to transformation. But let me tell you, not all the steps you take in transformational learning will lead to transformation. So that's a myth, that every time you engage in something that it will lead to transformation. The steps may help you get there, but it may not always lead to lasting transformation as Mesro thought about it, as Mesro has promoted that. So that's what we're going to talk about, the steps in which leads to transformation that is lasting. And the other reason why it's popular is because I think as educators, we want to believe that we make a difference in people's lives, that we influence positive change in society. And we would hope that this change would help and be part of the legacy that we leave behind. So going to the definition of transformational learning, I want to start by saying that transformational learning is a theory that was put forth by Mezirow in 1978. And since then, there's been so many iterations of that theory, and it's really evolved into different versions of that theory. And we're going to talk about most recent version of it. In 1991, Mezirow defined transformational theory as a process of using prior interpretation to construe new or revised interpretation of meaning of one's experience in order to guide future action. What that means, according to Mezirow, is that every experience we encounter, we make meaning out of it. And it's tagged in our meaning scheme, and that experience becomes an interpretation. So for example, if a student has a particular experience with a teacher who does not encourage questioning, that experience is going to impact how the student participates in future classes, because he's using or she's using that experience to dictate future experiences. Right? So hence transformation occurs when you use prior interpretation to come up with new interpretation to guide behavior. I also want to talk about the definition that Hogan talks about in 2016. And what I like about Chad Hogan's definition is he highlights this idea of irreversible changes. I think that clarifies some of the misconceptions we have about transformation. Because when we think about transformation, we think about change. One thing that comes to mind every time I think about transformation, I think about weight loss, right? We hear about all these different diets and different ways to lose weight and large amounts of weight being lost. But research shows that a lot of people who lose large amounts of weight actually gain it back within the first 5 years. So that type of transformation is not what Hogan and Mezirow is talking about. When you have, when the transformation that they are talking about is irreversible, you are then operating from a new framework that does not ask, that you don't have to go back to old behaviors. Okay, so this is a really important point, because when the first thought that comes about transformation is change, but this is going beyond just simple change. So couple of terminologies that I want to raise here to understand how we make meaning. So one terminology is ontology, right? How we come to know what we know, right? In our formative years, some of you may have learned through stories. Some of you may have learned through oral history, while some others might have learned through just focused on books and knowledge that's come from books. Right? So different forms of knowledge is how we come to know what we know is really important, because that influences how we make meaning. That's the ontology. And the epistemology is how we know what we know. So it's about truth. What do we consider to be truthful? Are you somebody who's a positivist? or somebody who is more subjective and is comfortable with having interpreted, people interpreting meaning, right? So that's reflected in the research we do, right? You have the quantitative and the qualitative, right? And it's very rare for people to, change aisles, because they are so influenced by the epistemology of how they know, and they believe that is it, and there's no room for expansion there. Right? The image that you see here, if I'd ask you in a classroom, if we were sitting together and I would say, so what do you think about this image, right? What ideas, what do you think they're doing? Usually when I ask this question, I always get so many different interpretations of what these people are doing, what these young ladies are doing. And what it is this is a picture taken from ladies in West Africa who are learning how to swim. And they are using that device as a flotation device. But it's so easy to misinterpret that into something else. Another piece that I want to talk about is meaning schemas, right? So meaning schemes are supposed to be made up of specific knowledge, beliefs, values, judgments, and feelings that constitute interpretation of experience. In other words, meaning schemes are constructed on certain beliefs about how things work and how one should interact with people. Schemes are not only determine what we notice, but also what we don't notice, right? One meaning scheme may be associated with several ideas. So for example, your stereotypical meaning scheme about millennials may have several elements attached to it, right? So it could be that the stereotype might be they don't know, they need to know why, right? When you ask them to do something, they need to know why. That could be one meaning scheme. The other meaning scheme could be they want a trophy for everything. Now, these are stereotypes, again, but that's how you get created. Or another meaning scheme might be that there's want too much accommodation and flexibility. Now, these meaning schemes form clusters of meaning schemes, and these clusters of meaning schemes are what meaning perspectives and frames of reference encompass. When Mezirow first started his theory in 1978, he talked about meaning perspective. But in 2000, when he revised his theory, he added a frame of reference. So to him, his definition of a meaning perspective is a general frame of reference, worldview, or personal paradigm involving a collection of meaning schemes made up of higher order schemata, theories, propositions, beliefs, prototypes, and evaluation, right? So something that I want you to think about as we're looking at this meaning scheme, think about what is going to happen, what the meaning schemes will look like in homogeneous cultures, right? Where there is not much diversity of thought, right? They may be quite clustered with everyone, like a group think, right? So people have a very similar meaning scheme. So that's why it's really, as we look at one of the strategies, multiple perspective is a really important piece to expanding our meaning schemes. What it means, expanding meaning schemes, is also expanding your opportunity to experience things differently. So what are these meaning schemes made of? How are they influenced? Meaning schemes are influenced by 6 dimensions or codes. Okay, and these dimensions or codes are social linguistic, which is nothing but language, how we use language. So an example I'll give you is I've noticed, I just observed that in the presidential election year in the United States, when they refer to male candidates, they usually use Mr. and the last name. But when they refer to the female vice president candidate, they refer to her in the first name. This slip, this unconscious bias in addressing Mrs. Harris, right, is a way that shows the assumptions and the stereotypes that are around gender roles, around racial roles, right, and that intersectionality between gender and race. Okay, or aesthetic. What are the aesthetic codes? It's about how we consider what is beautiful, right? That influence our idea in our meaning schemes. That tells us what we consider to be beautiful. Is it dark skin, light skin, body shape? All that influences our meaning schemes and how we make meaning and how we interpret that and how we share that, right? Similarly, moral, ethical, right? How are you guided by that? Or philosophical. Epistemic is, as I mentioned before, is that, you know, are you somebody who considers that leaders and gurus and priests have the power of knowledge, right? And that you are not an autonomous thinker. You can't be an autonomous thinker because they hold the power. So it influences how we make meaning. And finally, psychological, which talks about how we see ourselves in relationship with others, right? What defense mechanisms do we use, right? What about self-efficacy? How confident do we feel? All these are influenced by our meaning schemes, and we hold thought processes, our values and our assumptions are all sitting in these meaning schemes, and they come up now and then as we interact with people. All right. So 2 more points that I want to highlight here along with the meaning schemes are habits of the mind and points of view. So habits of the mind refers to how we think based on what we've done before. So it's habitual ways of doing. Our brain loves to take shortcuts. And the more information we have, the more likely we are going to take that shortcut. Respond in a way that will use previous knowledge to interpret that situation, right? An example of a habit of the mind would be ethnocentrism, right? The predisposition to regard anyone outside of one's group as inferior, right? On the other hand, points of view is how we express our thoughts. So points of view are expressed through attitudes, beliefs, and judgments, right? Points of view are subject to continual change as we reflect and identify the need to modify previous assumption. Now, it's also that we try out different points of view to see if we are getting reinforced, whether it's safe to move on, right? So points of view are meaning schemes that are easier to expand compared to habit of the mind or frame of reference. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But points of view show the attitude we have about certain beliefs, values, and assumptions. It's also easy for people to camouflage their real assumptions by taking on other points of view, mimicking other points of view when they may not really make change. So something for you to identify or to be aware of. So we talked about meaning schemes and what role they play in making meaning. Another process that's really important is how we learn when information is presented to us. Mezirow was very influenced by Habermas. Habermas was somebody who presented this, 3 categories of learning, talked about technical, practical, and emancipatory. Mezirow called the technical instrumental and called practical communicative learning domains. He did not think that you needed to have an emancipatory learning domain, but he incorporated ideas of emancipatory learning domains into reflection. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a little way. But instrumental learning, I'm sure many of you are very familiar with that. It's theorists like Pavlov and Thorndike and Skinner who talk about scientific methods of testing a hypothesis. Instrumental learning revolves around determining the cause and effect relationship. The focus of this domain is problem solving, right? In instrumental, with attention to concrete and observable data. So this is, you're familiar with the quantitative studies that you do. There are variables, you look around those variables, you control those variables, and you give results, right? It could be that you get some data out of the variable. So let's take an example of you're getting some data of how a school is doing in some testing that they've done. And you find that some parents look at the data and they find that their school, or the public is not doing very well. The first thing that comes to their mind is that the teacher is not doing a good job, right? That's what they think about. Now, the teacher sees the same data and knows the building, knows the kids who are in the building, knows the demographics, knows the challenges of that, knows what progress they've made, right? And what they do is they take the data and they're thinking about ways to improve learning. Right? So you have 2 groups of people looking at the same data and coming with different conclusions. Okay? So instrumental learning in many ways does provide really good information, but may not have showcase or highlight the underlying issues that may explain why this is happening. On the other hand, communicative theory or learning theory, what it talks about is about explaining the meaning. How do people think about things and how do they go detailed into it? How do they explain what they are feeling? Right? So let's think about communicative in terms of understanding why things happen. okay, coming to a common ground understanding of why things are happening through different lenses, through different perspectives. And that's what the goal of communicative learning is. In transformational learning, you require both in instrumental as well as communicative learning. I think what communicative learning does is brings in perspectives that may be silent in the material. Okay. Now, since communicative learning is not interested in creating or showing causality, it's more interested in validity, in testing validity, right? And how do you test validity, right? There are three ways to test validity, right? One is to turn to authority figures, such again as teachers, leaders, priests, and say, if they say it's right, right? If they think it's right, it's right. The second is to turn to force, right? Where through the court systems, through politics, right? And the third option is rational discourse. Now, rational discourse is nothing but coming together using communicative learning to come and understand, to form the truth, to recognize that these are the different ways we agree that information is being used, right? This is the different ways we can look at this problem, at this information. That's the goal of rational discourse. Right? Now, in order to get into rational discourse, there has to be some common understanding, right? For example, if you and I are going to be talking about an issue, we have to have certain normative ways of understanding that problem. And when we don't have those normative ways, we are not able to communicate to each other, right? And so there are some normative ways that Mesro talks about. And one of it is descriptive statements, right? Where you're placing norms of this is how things should be, right? Or normative statement, which talks about what within this culture, what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do. Anything that does not happen within this culture, might be problematic. We also have evaluative statements where here is, we can't have rational discourse because you and I don't believe that this form of evaluation, right? It could be positivist or constructivist, is the right way knowledge is created. Right? So there you have a problem right there. Or expressive statements, right? You might, you act in a way that does not show authenticity. And then it's very difficult for us to communicate when I feel that you're not authentically wanting to understand this information. Talk to me, learn this information with me in our conversation. Or explicit statement, right? Where you have to, you have to control your emotions. There are certain emotions that go with certain normative ways of behavior. So for example, it's unlikely that in a funeral that you're going to laugh. That's normative behavior. Right? So Mesro says that these normative groundings, that he calls of as statements, needs to be established, needs to be made explicit, because they are implicit. They need to be made explicit so that conversations can take place. If they're not made explicit, we will be spinning our wheels, because we'll be talking against each other, not to each other, right? We'll be discussing things that will pass over our heads. So that's something for you to think about too. Okay, I want to share this video with Bunker Roy and just give you an example of normative behavior, and if this fits in within the norms that you know, and let's talk about it after we watch it. Okay, so I'll put it on.
I went to a very elitist, snobbish, expensive education in India, and that almost destroyed me. I was all set to be a diplomat, teacher, doctor, all laid out. Then I don't look it, but I was the Indian national squash champion for 3 years. The whole world was laid out for me. Everything was on my feet. Could do nothing wrong. And then I thought, out of curiosity, I'd like to go and live in a work, just see what a village is like. So in 1965, I went to what is called the worst Bihar famine in India, and I saw starvation, death, people dying of hunger for the first time. Changed my life. Came back home, told my mother, I like to live and work in a village. Mother went into a coma. What is this? The whole world is laid out for you, the best jobs are laying out for you, and you want to go and work in a village? I mean, is there something wrong with you? I said, no, I've got the best education, it made me think, and I wanted to give something back in my own way. What do you want to do in a village? No job, no money, no security, no prospect. I said, I want to live and dig wells for 5 years. Dig wells for 5 years? You went to the most expensive school and college in India and you want to dig wells for 5 years? She didn't speak to me for a very long time because she thought I'd let my family down. But then I was exposed to the most extraordinary knowledge and skills that very poor people have, which is never brought into mainstream, which is never identified, respected, applied on a large scale. And I thought I'd start a barefoot college only for the poor. What the poor thought was important would be reflected in the college. Went to this village for the first time. Elders came to me and said, are you running from the police? I said, no. You failed in your exam? I said, no. You didn't get a government job? I said, no. What are you doing here? Why are you here? The education system in India makes you look at Paris and Delhi and Zurich. What are you doing in this village? Is there something wrong with you you're not telling us? I said, no. I want to actually start a college only for the poor. What the poor thought was important would be reflected in the college. So then they gave me some very sound and profound advice. They said, please don't bring anyone with a degree and qualification into your college. So it's the only college in India where if you should have a PhD or a master's, you're disqualified to come. You have to be a cop-out or a washout or a dropout to come to our college. You have to work with your hands. You have to have a dignity of labor. You have to show that you have a skill that you can offer to the community and provide a service to the community. So we started the Barefoot College and we redefined professionalism. Who is a professional? A professional is someone who has a combination of competence, confidence, and belief. A water diviner is a professional. A traditional midwife is a professional. A traditional bone setter is a professional. These are professionals all over the world. You'll find them in any inaccessible village around the world. And we thought that these people should come into mainstream and show that the knowledge and skills that they have is universal. It needs to be used, needs to be applied, it needs to be shown to the world outside that these knowledge and skills are relevant even today. So the college works following the lifestyle and work style of Mahatma Gandhi. You eat on the floor, you sleep on the floor, you work on the floor. There are no contracts, no written contracts. You can stay with me for 20 years, go tomorrow. And no one can get more than $100 a month. You come for the money, you don't come to Barefoot College. You come for the work and the challenge, you come to the Barefoot College. That is where we want you to try crazy ideas. Whatever idea you have, come and try. Doesn't matter if you fail. Battered, bruised, you start again. It's the only college where the teacher is the learner and the learner is the teacher. And it's the only college where you don't give a certificate. You are certified by the community you serve. You don't need a paper to hang on the wall to show that you are an engineer. So when they said that, they said, well, show us what is possible. What are you doing? This is all mumbo jumbo if you can't show it on the ground. So we built the first Barefoot College in 1986. It was built by 12 barefoot architects who can't read and write. Built on $1.50 a square foot. 150 people lived there, worked there. They got the Aga Khan Award for Architecture in 2002. But then they suspected, they thought there was an architect behind it. I said, yes, they made the blueprints for the barefoot architects actually constructed the college. We are the only ones who actually returned the award for $50,000 because they didn't believe us and we thought that they were actually casting aspersions on the barefoot architects at Bologna. I asked a forester, high-powered, paper-qualified expert. I said, what can you build in this place? He had one look at the soil and said, forget it, no way, nothing can work. No water, rocky soil. I was in a bit of a spot. And I said, okay, I'll go to the old man in the village and say, what should I grow in this pot? He looked quietly at me and said, you build this, you put this, and it'll work. This is what it looks like today. Went to the roof, and all the women said, clear out. The men should clear out because we don't want to share this technology with the men. This is waterproofing the roof. It is a bit of jaggery, bit of urine, a bit of other things I don't know, but it actually doesn't leak. Since 1986, it hasn't leaked. This technology, the women will not share with the men. It's the only college which is fully solar electrified. All the power comes from the sun. 45 kilowatts of panels on the roof and everything works out the sun for the next 25 years. So long as the sun shines, I have no problem with power. But the beauty is that it was installed by a priest, a Hindu priest who's only done 8 years of primary schooling. Never been to school, never been to college. He knows more about solar than anyone I know anywhere in the world. Yeah.
So I want to stop here. I really encourage you to see the rest of the video. Bunker Roy gives example after example of using indigenous knowledge, traditional knowledge as ways to accomplish tasks. But what he raises, the question that he raises, is difficult for many of us to think of it as normative, right? Because that's not the norm of what we understand education is, right? Some of it, right? We live in a society that requires us to get that certificate, right? We value those certificates, right? So if you don't have validity criterias that are very similar, or you don't explicitly state those validity criterias, then you will never understand where Bunker Roy is coming from. Because his norms are very different from what my norms might be. In what I value, what I have been establishing, what I understand of what knowledge is. And that influences how we make meaning. Okay? So, moving on, Mesro talked about 10 steps or 10 phases for transformation. When he first started, he said that it was a very linear process. But research has shown otherwise, that it is more circular, that it's more evolving, it's spiraling in nature, and people can even miss steps. So they don't have to go through 1 to 10 in that order. So, but what needs to happen is the first step, disorienting dilemma, and the last step, regenerating, which is nothing but action. You have to take action for your new thoughts. It has to align with your new thoughts. It can't align with your old meaning perspectives. So there are many researchers who have come up with different versions of this. And one version that Herbies talks about really calls out to me that I use, and it succinctly puts 4 components that are needed for transformation. These are the 4 key components that are needed for transformation to occur. So 1 is disorienting dilemma. Now again, when Mesro was talking about disorienting dilemma, he started his theory by observing his wife who was re-entering college. And that was his sample, right? All the women who were re-entering college. So that was a sample group, and he felt that they were experiencing this life-changing education. They had experienced this crisis, and they needed a crisis to motivate the person to start having that transformation. So for a long time, people believe that if you do not have this disorienting dilemma, you can't start the transformation. So it is true that for many people that, a disorienting dilemma like a crisis changes behavior, right? Makes us think. We are in a crisis. We see, it's a really good example. We know how that in infection, times of infection, how we have to be careful, right? We have to have certain hygiene, but we've not been implementing it for so many years. But now COVID has changed our behavior. So that's a transformation that is epical, that is with a crisis that happens. Black Lives Matters is another crisis, right? It's not George Floyd. There were many African Americans who suffered police brutality before George Floyd. But there was a tipping point in that crisis that sparked the riots and the protest, right? So when does that disorienting dilemma, that crisis happen? Whenever your meaning perspectives, the new meaning perspectives cannot be fit into the old meaning perspective, that's when, you start this transformational process. So the old meaning schemas need to have new meaning schemas, and that's why you need to start this transformation. Now, Hogan, et al. And Knoll, they all talk about that every day we encounter things that are counterintuitive, that are shaping our meaning schemes. So it's also possible that you will have a cumulative effect. It may not be that one big thing, but cumulatively there may be a tipping point for you where you experience that aha, and that motivates you to start. So a disorienting dilemma is nothing but that motivation that jump starts your transformational process. So you need that one way or the other, whether it is the crisis that leads to it or a cumulative effect that leads to it. Okay, so that's a really important one. The next thing I want to talk about in that 4 quadrants is critical thinking. Now, critical thinking is a very complex topic, and you really have to go very detailed, and you can have like 3 different lectures just on this. But what I want to just touch upon, what Mezirow is talking about, is reflection. Okay, so he talks about critical thinking. He talks about how you're reflecting. Right? He says, okay, you can have non-reflective action, which is called habitual, or you can be thoughtful, but really it's not reflective enough. Okay? And that's non-reflective action. Then you can have reflective action, and within that reflective action, you can have thoughtful reflection, thoughtful action with reflection, and retroactive reflection is when you think about it after ex post facto reflection, right? So in thoughtful action, you are focusing on the content. You're not doing habitual ways of responding. You're looking at the problem and you're saying, okay, what is this all about? I know that I have ideas about this problem, but I'm going to go deeper into really understanding what this problem is about. Right? So if we take the question, the example of the data, right? If a parent saw the data, right? In content reflection would be, okay, I understand these numbers. What is this numbers covering? Right? Which subjects are they covering? What was the data that they had previously? What is the story that this data is telling? Right? You're digging deeper in trying to understand the content of that issue. Right? In process reflection, the parent would perhaps be thinking, okay, what has the school done to increase these scores, right? Or which strategies are really helping, or which subjects are they finding it harder to succeed? So it's the process, the problem solving part of it that they're focusing in process. Now that's important too, because content and process are 2 different ways of thinking. Okay, so both together are likely to change some meaning scheme. So you're going deeper into the content, asking those questions to content to get a better understanding rather than just responding to an action, just be based on your previous experience, right? Or with your interaction with a person, right? If you have an experience with a person, do you jump to conclusions, or you saying, okay, let me stop right here and try to understand what this person is experiencing and why they are behaving the way they're doing and what brought about this behavior, right? So that is content and process. Now in retroactive reflection, there's one more step that Mezirow talks about, and it's much more profound. It's premise reflection, where you're really focusing on the assumptions you're making. So let's take back those grades, right? The data that we saw, right? So suppose you're having a parent-teacher meeting, and a larger parent-teacher meeting, and there you discuss as a group, what is it that we want to measure? right? While these measure how our students are doing in this area, how about measuring the areas that we are focusing on, right? And even questioning, why is it that these numbers matter in the first place? Do they really tell a story that will show that they will be productive members in society? If that's the goal, what is the goal? Where is the goal? Right? We follow systems over and over again without questioning its validity, without questioning why we do what we do. And as a result, we keep on doing things that may not be effective. In a time and age where we have to be creative, it's to ask those premise questions, is to ask those beliefs, those, why is it that we have this belief? Who does it serve? Right? Where did it come from? What's the history of this? Is it appropriate for this time and age? Will it make us more competitive? Will it give our students an edge? So those questions, the whole idea here is by going deeper into assumptions and the beliefs through communication, right? Through reflection, not just as individual, but as a community, we can, think about this problem in different ways. Another part, so we talked about disorienting a dilemma. That's the first one. Then we talked about critical reflection. And the third one is rational discourse, right? Talking to each other, learning from each other, understanding where different people's assumptions are and where they sit. One of the tools that I use, and I love this in Johari Windows, and I use this a lot for communication, wherever I see impasse, when I look at teams that cannot go further, especially in my consultancy, I'm asking them to explore this, right? So one is we want to be in the quadrant of open self, right? That's the ideal place to be, where you know things and the people who are with you also know things about you, right? You're all on the same page, what you're thinking, all the assumptions you're making, your thoughts, the ideas, you're making it explicit, and both of you know it. That's the place we want to be. The blind self is information about you that you don't know, but others do know. And this is very common in students, right? When I give some feedback, I say, I observed this, or, it's like, really? I didn't even know that existed. Or even, when friends tell you something. I recently watched Netflix, Masaba, the TV show, and that really shows you the blind self, where her friend is telling her, do you know you do this? Right? And when she's not even aware that she's this is how she behaves, right? Or doesn't synthesize it that way. Now, the unknown self is information that both of you don't know, right? And this is the brainstorming sessions. You started off one way and then you discover something new. And that's really a creative space, right? Because you're coming with a common goal there, right? That's one way of looking at it. Another piece of it is that, especially with meaning perspectives, when you get new meaning perspectives, you have other meaning perspectives that start shaking, right? So that's the unknown self. And then the hidden self is information about you that you know, but others don't know. Now, this I see in students, right, in our classrooms. right? Our students they have certain things that they want to share, but we may not have access to that. We may not know that history about them, right? Their learning, their interaction with material, how they consume information, right? So this is a really good tool to start conversation, to open up to dialogue, to understand each other, to learn from each other. You know, I love what Namrata, when she was reading the core principles of the institution, you know, where it is about growing, right? It is recognizing that we are bigger than ourselves, that we're constantly moving forward. Right? Or how Bunker Roy talks about is that the teacher is the learner and the learner is the teacher. Right? That is the whole concept of servant leadership. So moving forward, I want to just play this video. It's really reminds me, and I watched this so many times as educators, as you know, it's so important for us to recognize, especially us who we hold so much of knowledge in so many ways, we learn so many things, and it's so easy to fall into the trap to thinking that we know everything, right? I come back to this video at least once a month to remind me that we have so many cognitive biases. You know, research reports that over 50 cognitive biases are reported. Right? We have to constantly recognize that we are operating within those parameters of cognitive bias. Let's watch this video and hear from Destin.
Hey, it's me, Destin. Welcome back to Smarter Every Day. You've heard people say it's just like riding a bike, meaning it's really easy and you can't forget how to do it, right? But I did something. I did something that damaged my mind. It happened on the streets of Amsterdam, and I got really scared, honestly. I can't ride a bike like you can anymore. Before I show you the video of what happened, I need to tell you the backstory. Like many 6-year-olds with a MacGyver mullet, I learned how to ride a bike when I was really young. I had learned a life skill and I was really proud of it. Everything changed though when my friend Barney called me 25 years later. Where I work, the welders are geniuses and they like to play jokes on the engineers. He had a challenge for me. He had built a special bicycle and he wanted me to try to ride it. He had only changed one thing. When you turn the handlebar to the left, the wheel goes to the right. When you turn it to the right, the wheel goes to the left. I thought this would be easy, so I hopped on the bike ready to demonstrate how quickly I could conquer this.
And here he is, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Destin Sandlin. First attempt riding the bicycle.
All right. So the faster I go,
Yeah.
I couldn't do it. You can see that I'm laughing, but I'm actually really frustrated. In this moment, I had a really deep revelation. My thinking was in a rut. This bike revealed a very deep truth to me. I had the knowledge of how to operate the bike, but I did not have the understanding. Therefore, knowledge is not understanding. Look, I know what you're probably thinking. Destin's probably just an uncoordinated engineer and can't do it. But that's not the case at all. The algorithm that's associated with riding a bike in your brain is just that complicated. Think about it. Downwards force on the pedals, leaning your whole body, pulling and pushing the handlebars, gyroscopic precession in the wheels. Every single force is part of this algorithm. And if you change any one part, it affects the entire control system. I do not make definitive statements that often, but I'm telling you right now, you cannot ride this bicycle. You might think you can, but you can't. I know this because I'm often asked to speak at universities and conferences, and I take the bike with me. It's always the same. People think they're going to try some trick or they're just going to power through it. It doesn't work. Your brain cannot handle this.
I'm just going to move this forward a bit.
What? So here's what I did. It was a personal challenge. I stayed out here in this driveway and I practiced about 5 minutes every day. My neighbors made fun of me. I had many wrecks, but after 8 months, this happened. One day I couldn't ride the bike and the next day I could. It was like I could feel some kind of pathway in my brain that was now unlocked. It was really weird though. It's like there's this trail in my brain, but if I wasn't paying close enough attention to it, my brain would easily lose that neural path and jump back onto the old road it was more familiar with. Any small distractions at all, like a cell phone ringing in my pocket, would instantly throw my brain back to the old control algorithm and I would wreck, but at least I could ride it. My son is the closest person to me genetically, and he's been riding a normal bike for 3 years. That's over half his life. I wanted to know how long it would take him to learn how to ride a backwards bike, so I told him if he learned how to ride a backwards bike, he could go with me to Australia and meet a real astronaut.
Are you going to give up? Go ahead. This is how it starts. Look at this. This is such a big deal. Get up. You got it. Did you see his brain get it? So he, in how many weeks have we been doing this? 2 weeks? In 2 weeks, he did something that took me 8 months to do, which demonstrates that a child has more neuroplasticity, am I even saying that right, than an adult.
It's clear from this experiment that children have a much more plastic brain than adults. That's why the best time to learn a language is when you're a young child.
All right, today's bike log. I can ride smooth, I can ride fast. I'm thinking the experiment is over. Okay, now I'm in Amsterdam, a city that has more bicycles than people. The question is, can I ride a normal bike now? I mean, I've spent all this time unlearning how to ride a bike. If I go back and try to ride a normal one, will my brain mess up? So I've tweeted a Smarter Everyday meetup, if you will, and I'm gonna see if somebody brings a bicycle and I'm gonna try to ride a normal bike. It's backwards, it's backwards.
This was one of the most frustrating moments of my life. I had ridden a normal bike since I was 6, but in this moment, I couldn't do it anymore. I had set out to prove that I could free my brain from a cognitive bias. But at this point, I'm pretty sure that all I've proved is that I can only redesignate that bias.
So what you're not seeing is just a group of people here looking at me, looking at the strange American. I can't ride a bike because they think I'm dumb, but I'm actually 2 levels deep into this because I've learned and unlearned. All right.
After 20 minutes of making a fool out of myself, suddenly my brain clicked back into the old algorithm. I can't explain it, but it happened in a very specific moment.
Got it. I'm back. Oh, quick. Hold on, quick. I got it.
Forget how to ride a bike. So I learned 3 things from this experiment. I learned that welders are often smarter than engineers. I learned that knowledge does not equal understanding. And I learned that truth is truth, no matter what I think about it. So be very careful how you interpret things, because you're looking at the world with a bias, whether you think you are or not. I'm Destin. I'm getting smart.
So just a reminder again that, we need to operate with humility, recognizing that how we interpret and make meaning may be biased based not just on some of the neuropathways in this case, but just with the influences that we've had. Okay.
Hey, it's me, Destin.
All right. So just to recap again, transformation can take place, I said, in 4 different ways. And what happens when you transform? You can elaborate or expand your point of view. Now, that's the lowest level of transformation. You could transform your habits of the mind. So, for example, let's take an example about global warming. So I think that global warming is a hoax, right? When I start being introduced to this idea of global warming, I might start reading some literature and I might think, okay, there may be some evidence to this. I'm not convinced yet. So that shows your point of view, right? And then, you read some more and start talking to people. You see that when this conversation about global warming happens, you don't automatically go in and talk about your previous ways of thinking. You're thinking, you say, I've read some evidence. There is, talk about how this happens, this global warming happens and how it's affecting. And you start talking a little bit about it, showing that you're not engaging in that habitual behavior, right? when it comes to elaborating or expanding frames of reference, here you are getting, you're trying to put in new frames of reference, right? You're adding a few new frames, you're expanding these frames of reference, those clusters of meaning schemas, to show a little bit more involvement in this idea that global warming is a real thing, right? When you acquire a new perspective or frame of action, your action is aligned with your understanding of what the effects of global warming is and how you play a role in global warming. So you may choose to become a vegan, you may choose to buy an electric car, you may choose to have when you fly, you may choose to pay for your carbon footprints. My husband and I, we travel to India once a year, and we pay an organization to plant trees to counteract the carbon footprints that we, place. So the point I'm making here is that everything that you do, especially when you're transformed, it has to result in action that is aligned with your new perspective. If it is not aligned with your new perspective, then it's not transformation. It's many other things, but not transformation as Mesro envisioned it. Okay. Now, again, this is just a recap of the meaning schemes, what they play, how they are influenced by those 6 dimensions. We have habit of the mind, points of view, frames of reference, and there are 4 different ways we can change. You have to have that disorienting dilemma. You need to engage in critical reflection. You need to be engaged in rational discourse, and then action that showcases your new perspective. Okay, so that was the theory part, and I want to talk now about how educators can support transformational learning, right? So one thing an educator can do is to create an environment of trust, right? Facilitate sensitive relationship among students. Right? Patrick Menzioni talks about vulnerability-based trust, not predictability-based trust. And what he means by that is that you're sharing pieces of you so that you know that people are not going to judge. Similarly, students have to feel safe if they are going to say that they are going to make mistakes, right? Iterative process, in the education departments that I work, we really talk a lot about iterative process, because what it's really showing your growth over a period of time, right? That's a form of showing progress, right? Or it's another thing that's really important for creating an environment of trust is not just between the teacher and the student, but also how do you facilitate trust between students, among students, so that they can challenge each other, right? So that they can listen to each other's points of view. If your classroom is not that experimental space, right, how can they reflect back into the world, right? It should be a way that it's that lab where they can make those mistakes, so when they go back out in the world, they are not penalized for it. I forgot to mention in critical thinking, Paulo Freire's this whole banking system, right? He talks about that our education should not just be a banking system, but it's that relationship between the teacher and the student, and that the teacher should be involved in that student's learning. Right. Part of that also is that giving an opportunity for the student to go and apply that knowledge in real life settings, because application is a really good way to measure how much learning has taken place. So having curriculum that shows application. You know, being a role model, I think you know it as an educator, we are constantly, modeling for our students. Right? For me, I am always putting myself in that disequilibrium, that disorienting dilemma, and I share with my students when I do that. For example, I didn't know how to swim, and I decided if I can't get in the water, I will get on the water. So 3 years ago, I joined a paddling team. And now I race with this women's team. We go around the country, the Pacific Northwest, to race in paddling competitions, right? So the students can see that you are also looking for change, that you are also, you understand what it feels to be uneasy in the space of change, right? I'll give you another example, is that a student of mine who is 70 years old, educator for 40 years, been, wrote a couple of books, decided to come to do his doctorate. And he came to me with this topic about self-efficacy. And what I noticed is that I kept asking him, how much do you know about this topic? And he was fairly cognizant of what he knew. He knew a lot of information. So I asked him, so what's there in for you? What are you learning new about this, right? And he had nothing to answer. So I sent him back and I said, let's go look in the literature of something you don't know and there's a gap, right, to see. And so he came up, and right now he's doing his research on self-efficacy doubt. Now, when we think of self-efficacy, we think about you either have it or you don't have it. And that's one of the cognitive bias, right? We think in dichotomies. We don't think in continuums. That's our human nature. Good, bad, right? Those dichotomies. So self-efficacy doubt is somewhere in the middle. It's not doubt that is so debilitating, and it's not confidence that you call it self-efficacy. It's self-efficacy doubt. And what he's checking right now, what he's measuring, is how teachers go through the self-efficacy doubt, and can they be effective even in self-efficacy doubt. So that's something different. So out of this comes creativity. Another thing that I would recommend is developing curriculum, right? When you develop curriculum, do you have assignments? Do you present information in multiple points of view? Or do you focus only in one point of view? I remember growing, in my education days in India, that we focused a lot on Western culture, right? Authors that came from Western culture, but did not focus on knowledge or authors that came from Asia, Singapore or other parts of Asia, China, or Middle East, or Africa. Right? That's the bias that we have in our culture, where we think that only certain groups of people holds knowledge, and it's valid knowledge, while other groups of people don't. When I look at my students, I tell them, go out of America to go and find your research. I'm always asking my students to go out of the States to see the research. Right? Because you get multiple points of view. When you are isolated within the space, expand that space. The more you expand that space in curriculum, the more you will be able to have a rich understanding of the phenomenon. You know, another one is encourage critical reflection. Right? One of the things that I do for my students before class is we do meditation. Right? And journaling, you know, time to think. Today, we are so bombarded with information that we do not slow our mind down. Habitual action happens when we are stressed, when we have a lot of information and just respond, right? We just react. But slowing your mind down helps towards reflection. Now, this is wisdom that, you know, our ancestors will tell you, right? Grandmother says, slow it down, right? But we don't seem to recognize the value for that. But it is very valuable to slow your brain down. And, you know, I learned this from my husband, who's an introvert. And one thing I learned about what he says to me, and I think there's so much value, he says, let me think about it. As an extrovert, I think about ideas and thought process externally, and I can come quickly. For him, as an introvert, he has to process it internally. And I have found that his strategy of processing is it's just slowing the mind down and taking time to think about it. So value those introverts in your life who can teach you to slow your mind down. Right? Multiple forms of evidence is really important. We talked about evidence, right? Now, when we make claims, we want to make sure that it's supported by evidence that is logical. So, you know, transformational learning theory is a rational theory, right? So multiple forms of evidence is very important. And another reason for multiple forms of evidence, use instrumental as well as communicative evidence, right? Again, to broaden that scope of how you can make meaning, how you understand something. It's important. Teach students to argue, feel comfortable in having discussions when there's chaos, right? Because if a student can stand up and articulate and promote their ideas, what they're doing is making explicit their assumptions. Right? They're trying to bring normative behavior, right? They're having those validity criteria they're raising. So you want more of that. Avoid coercion. You know, as educators, we have the power to influence. So we really have to be careful, especially in this theory, in how we push. Right? How we support. The ethical piece of it is really important, right? You want to ensure that they are trying to support that kind of thinking, right? Encourage democratic participation and do not get upset when people are challenging you, especially your students. Engage in that. Okay, I think we're running perhaps a little over time. So I want to give some time for questioning, but as you can see, the benefits for transformational learning is that you are building autonomous thinkers. Okay, you are building, setting the stage for change. Because transformation the process is rather lengthy. It's not easy, it takes time. You need to be kind to yourself. You need to be kind to people around you. You need to have patience, because this takes time, but not give up. Okay, so I'm going to stop here, and perhaps I'll answer some of your questions and see if, if you have any questions about this topic that I can shed light on.
Thank you so much, ma'am. And now we will move on to the question and answer session. Bindu madam, are there any questions?
Yes, there are a few questions that our participants who've been keenly listening to all that ma'am was saying have come up with few questions. With your permission, may I begin with the questions?
Yes, please.
One of our participants, Ms. Smita Chandran, wanted to know, why do we need to attune ourselves with the societal norms and accumulate degrees when time and again it has been proven that skills and practicalities showcases our actual learning?
So if you can repeat that question, I apologize. I wasn't. So if I repeat that, why do we need to follow through the norms? Like,
Yes.
Yeah.
Of the society?
Yeah. It's a really good question. It's a very good question. One of the things is we have to recognize the culture in which we are living in, right? Our culture appears to be very rule bound, right? We like norms to keep control, right? That's the form. Norms help you keep control and give power to certain groups of people and do not for other groups of people. So I 100% agree with you to say challenge those norms that don't make sense, that do not benefit everybody, right? Norms that only benefit some people are not norms that are really helpful to move society forward. So thank you for asking that question. I have been challenging norms all the time. And it should make, it's not that you are doing it to say that you want to, you don't just challenge norm to disrespect people, right? And that's one thing we have to understand when we have that dialogue, is that, can I talk to you? Can I share what I'm thinking without you thinking that when I say something, it's about you? We have to get away from that. I had a really great professor. He was from Thailand, and he taught me, he said, Annie, if you want to be successful, use the Buddhist principle of detachment. And what that means is that you should be in the present. Do not worry about the outcomes, right? Worry about the process, right? Have you given your best? Have you done everything you could do? I think that's a big shift, right? We take it personally, everything we do. So I want to encourage you, continue to challenge. And you win some, you lose some, but don't give up.
Thank you, Annie ma'am. Smita Chandran, I hope that answers the question well. And like ma'am said, you win some and you lose some. Next question was asked by our participant Neha Kiran Bempati. She actually wanted to know if there are any activities or worksheets to introduce the ideas of transformational learning. But I think that you covered in your slides already, but if you would like to throw some more light on it.
Yes, absolutely. So most of the activities I do, experiential activities, are geared towards multiple points of view. So if that's what I want, right? So I will I'll give you a very simple example. We learn about the three pigs, right? And the fox. So perspective taking. So we all know what the three pigs said, but has anyone heard about what the fox said in this whole conversation? We don't have a storybook which tells what the fox said in this whole conversation. So I asked them to imagine what the fox is saying. Right? So you take perspectives from different points of view and introduce those. So there are many different activities you can do that. That's one, perspective taking. And I use this with teachers everywhere when I teach, do professional development for teachers. Because it is just difficult for us to take that perspective that is not within our meaning schema. It needs practice. And you know what will happen? Not always. What will happen to your students over time, because, it's a muscle, is that initially they may not agree, but 5, 10, 15, 20 sessions later, they may be slower to respond, slower to resist, slower to jump into conclusion. So one thing about transformational learning is that you may start the process, but somebody else may end it. And it doesn't really matter. The goal is for you to begin and support it. So that's one activity, but what I would do, another way to think about it creatively, is to take what concept are you trying to get at? Right? Multiple perspective, open up meaning schemas, hit on social linguistic meaning schemas, right? So how do we have activities that will open that up? I hope that answers your question. Others, we could sit here for the whole time and give you 20 other options for you to think about.
Yes, and I think your slides also did explain quite a few ways in which we could start our students on it. Neha Kiran ma'am had another question. I think once she looked at the activities that you suggested, she wanted to know, how do we overcome problems like the time constraints and overpopulated classrooms, especially I think with reference to Indian situation. So if you could answer
Absolutely. That. So, I'm a curriculum developer and I do a lot of online work, and I don't know if you're sure if you are familiar with flipped classroom concepts, but the whole idea of flipped classroom, and this saves a lot of time. If you've not tried it, try it. What you do is you do the reading, give them work to do, their reading, which you're already giving them, but give them assignments to do prior to class. And in class, you focus, you're not teaching. You're not having to explain much. You're clarifying, you're expanding, you're giving them opportunity to showcase what they do. So when you say flipped classroom, what we are doing is we are putting the burden on the student. Right? Because the assumption of transformational learning is that the student is ready to change their perspective, or we are to get them ready to change their perspective or be open to change that perspective. We've had much success with flipped classroom. And my suggestion to you, Neha, would be to look up, just Google flipped classroom concept, and it works really well.
Ma'am, flipped classroom is indeed a concept that is catching up in India also in our classrooms. We see it more often, and hopefully we'll have that same kind of success with it. Another participant, Ms. Jyotsna Sudhakar, wanted to know, how can we make our students become metacritical participants in this transformational learning?
Yeah, it's a really good question. You have to inspire, right? You want, one of the things that I tell when I was my first class, I tell them, let me tell you why I'm here. I'm in the business of raising consciousness. That is my only goal here. My goal for you is to raise your consciousness, right? There's another concept that I tell them, again, from the Buddhist principle, They say that when a student is ready, the teacher appears. And I tell them this. I said, I am ready to give you all the support if you show up in this class. And let me tell you what show up looks like in this class. Right? Now, I think this is the difference between Western and Eastern culture, self-regulation. There is ownership on the student, to do things, right? To motivate them that they are there. And you call them out when they don't, right? And you have a conversation with them, but also recognize that you might not be that teacher for them at this given moment of time. And that's okay too. I don't know if it's not a fatalistic way of thinking, but my point I'm making here, and I'm talking at graduate level. I don't know if your question was more at undergraduate and primary K to 12. So I don't know if that's a different strategy, right? So I'm not sure if, the student has to be engaged or want to learn, right? What is the goal of learning? Yeah.
Ma'am, if you spoke about undergraduate, postgraduate students, what about, is this transformational learning something that can be, we can probably cultivate as a habit right from the beginning, maybe from kindergarten and primary? Do you think that's a good idea?
This is for adult learning. And the difference between that is that in formative years, you are going to follow. Okay. You're not going to start thinking for yourself. Yes. But what research has shown is more and more high schoolers, even college, first year, second year college students, you can use this. Yeah. Okay. But how can you facilitate skills in kids? And I'll tell you how. Okay. So think about Montessori education versus traditional education. What is Montessori education doing? It is asking you to discover. It's not focused on how much you know in a certain way that traditional education does. Right? That's one way. So look into those styles of teaching that comes from ontology and epistemology. Second, in your homes, can you have times for 2 minutes, you have to pitch something, right? I tell my students, if you want to raise this, they ask the same question, how can I develop this in my kids? And I say, give them opportunity to debate, right? Give them opportunity to make arguments, make them look at different perspectives. So there is research which shows that bilingual students are more likely to be more cooperative and take on perspectives because in their brain, they're already switching languages. Right? My point is that we can, in children, we can start nurturing some of those activities in our home, but at their level, right? Their arguments may be flawed, but they know that they can raise their voice, that they can participate in a discussion. Or do we tell them, no, don't talk, what you say is not important? I grew up with that culture. Right, where my idea as a child, no, you can't participate. Right? You can't expect, I went through so much I had to learn. When I came to the States, I was so scared to participate because I was not nurtured in a way to participate, to share my opinions, to think that my opinions matter. Our culture raises us in a certain way that influences how we participate, right? At least the way I was raised, right? So we can do that for our children.
Thank you, Neha ma'am. So thank you, Annie ma'am.
If I could,
for all the teachers out there, you know what to do now. Yes, Gita ma'am.
If I could just intervene in between, Namrata ma'am actually accidentally has left the group. If you could just allow her to come inside.
Sorry about that. Yes.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay. Can we continue with the questions? I have a couple more for you, Annie ma'am.
Absolutely, absolutely. I love it.
There are a few participants who have similar questions, Gina, Jacob, Neha. They're talking about how to involve and engage students as well as parents in these transformational activities during the uncertainties that we have right now, where schools are closed and online classes are going on. So if you could elaborate on that.
Absolutely. One thing, there's a student of mine who's doing some research on restorative practices. I don't know if you're familiar with restorative practices. Restorative practices are forms that they have used more in terms of behavior modification, in punishment, in discipline. But the student is doing a form of circles where students are talking about how they feel in certain ways, how they how they feel about a situation. Now, in today's day and world, the simple act of listening is so valuable, because what is the reality? The reality is that all of us are on the screen time, right? We are all with our own devices, and that we are not talking to each other, right? That's one way. So I think just having conversation is one really important technique. Second is, when we do conversations, I have a student who is a principal in a school, and, they hold these same concepts, they have the parents listen to it, right? Ways in which we can motivate, where we can see current points of view. Because if we don't teach our communities to be open-minded, it doesn't matter what you do in your classroom, they have to go back to their homes, right? So there has to be that conversation. So I would encourage, in your teaching, teacher-parent meetings, when you have these big sessions, if you do have these kind of retreats, or if there is a space for them to, even watch online webinars, introduce these ideas of looking at multiple points of view, of motivating them, and, to listen to, if our communities is that the teacher will do everything, and the parent is, it's not about, at this point, it's not, we're not saying, how do you teach math? We're saying, can you just have a conversation with someone to, encourage them to think independently, to encourage them to be confident? It's a different skill set that we're asking them to develop. Right? Yeah, and my suggestion is not to give up. Let me tell you that when I, in my last position, I always give 2 years for any thing that I want to measure, right? It took me 2 years to build trust with my faculty. I was managing 30 faculty across the country. Took me 2 years. My point I'm making is that it takes time. And you just have to do the same thing in different ways. The way I look at meaning schemas, that cluster of meaning schemas, do you know when you have a jar, what do? You hit it around, so you have to loosen it. Right? We have to talk about the same thing over and over again in different ways to loosen that meaning schema, so that new meaning schemas can come in.
Very true. Thank you, ma'am. There's a question from a participant, Bharti Tandon. She would like to know how education can influence the socio-cultural aspect on transformational learning.
Yes, I always say I'm not in education for the money, right? We are not in education for the money. We are here to make that social change. I think education can help by asking these questions, Bharti, by you as an educator, what is your role, right? Instead of, I had this student who would always say to me, but the system is not right. Right? And I switched it around and I said, but what are you doing to participate in that system? How are you engaging? So transformation is about individual level, and automatically when there are so many people coming together, if each of us as educators are doing this, there will be a tipping point where things will change. So my suggestion is start with you. What is it that you are doing to contribute to this change, right? To change the mindset of the people around you.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Your response to an earlier question, there's another question that has come from it. Shraddha Sadasai, I would like to know, from which grade should the flipped classrooms be implemented? What would be an ideal age or stage for students?
Yeah, it's been, the research is mixed out here. I've seen in high school that it's most effective from high school onwards, but middle school you should test it out. There's mixed data with middle school, but mostly high school onwards.
Okay. So the students are by mature enough to
exactly taking on. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. There's one more question from a participant, Swati Goswami. She would like to know what should be the base of framing curriculum for transformational learning, because we talk about students all-round development as a primary aspect in our school and education system. So what should be the base for framing a curriculum for transformational learning?
So when I do, in my concept paper, you will see it, what are the outcomes, right? So there's worldviews, there is ontology, there's epistemology, there is how we see information. What I would look is when I do a checklist for my curriculum, I'm saying, am I presenting different worldviews when this material? I'll give you a very simple example. Like when we are teaching math, okay, right? What examples are we giving for math problems? Right? Are we giving a dominant culture math problem questions, or are we giving different cultures using social conversations to bring in math concepts, but will expand students' point of view? Right? So when you're thinking about curriculum, don't think of it as isolated, but here in the United States, we do a lot of integrative curriculum where we are thinking across the field, how is it that we can bring in more realities into the curriculum to expose people to different multiple points of view. And you can do that in grade 1 to grade 10, right? It doesn't matter. So I think for you to think about, when you're thinking about transformational, a key component to transformational is expanding perspectives, increasing perspectives, especially if you are a homogeneous culture. So if it is, a certain socioeconomic group, a certain religious group, right? Or a certain, any one of the homogeneous groups that you're thinking about, right? How is it that your students are being exposed to alternate points of view. So because when they go out to college, they will not come with that narrow point of view. We do a disservice to our students when we don't expose them to broader perspectives. Because then we tell them 10 years later, go ahead and survive in the world because that's what the world expects you to do. Right? And what happens? Our students then suddenly are exposed to this disequilibrium and they don't know how to survive, right? Because we've not taught them along the way. So when you're thinking of curriculum, think about ways you can bring multiple perspectives. Think about ways that you can encourage conversations, cross dialogue, and especially taking different points of view. So, what is it that, when we had in history lesson, what did the British think and what did the Indians in that same war think? And have a conversation among them. Or think about scientists. When you're thinking about scientists, right? We get what would a scientist, what would Galileo say, or, Watson, whatever, think about scientists and what would they say if they were today in present time? Right? So you want them to take perspectives for them to feel comfortable moving in and out of people's minds. That's what we are really doing, is that if I can get comfortable, so when you say something to me that is so weird to me, I have space to listen to you. That's the goal, is that I may not agree with you, but I will listen to you and I will ask questions to get a better understanding of where you're coming from. And that's what it's about social change. That's what we want. We are not talking, transformation is not talking about everyone thinking the same thing. No, on the contrary, what we are saying is, how do we build space for multiple thoughts and with respect, right? And we feel comfortable with that.
Thank you, ma'am. Wonderful examples and answers. And from the chat, I can see that a lot of teachers and students are agreeing to, they're really appreciating the ideas that you've given them about multiple perspectives. This is what I had so far as questions were concerned. Feedback has been tremendously wonderful. And I would hand over the session to Namrata ma'am and Geeta ma'am for further movement along. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bindu, and thank you, Dr. Annie. Such an enriching session. I was there on YouTube watching the comments, and it's really been a deep learning, a complete transformational learning. All the participants have been pouring their emojis, congratulating and appreciating the content, the way you've explained. It's really been incredible. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for organizing.
Thank you all the participants also for the motivating feedback and for your enriching questions. May I now request Dr. Geeta Gossain to propose the formal vote of thanks.
Thank you so much, Namrata ma'am. On behalf of MES's PILLAI College of Education and Research, New Panvel, and all the participants of this webinar, it is my proud privilege and honor to extend my deepest gratitude to respected Dr. Annie Gray for her excellent deliberation on the topic, Teaching for Prospective Change, Embracing Transformational Learning Practices. Ma'am's vast and in-depth knowledge on the concept did complete justice to it and brought clarity to the concept and busted some myths related to transformational learning. Being a teacher to the core, she made the session very thought-provoking. She brought to our notice how gradual and deep transformational learning is. It takes time to create new meaning schemes and how opportunities of vast experiences to the learners will help them in the long run. The session was embedded with related videos for a better understanding and suggested effective ways we teachers can support transformational learning. Thank you so much, madam. My deepest gratitude to our founders, Dr. Vasudevan Pillai sir and Dr. Daphne Pillai ma'am, for giving us the opportunity and freedom to organize such sessions and help us grow as an institution. A big thank you to the strongest pillar of our institution, Dr. Sally Enos, for her support and spirit. She never gets tired with us and always makes it a point to give us that little push to achieve our potential. Thank you so much, ma'am. The session would not have been possible without Sukhdeep Singh sir and his team of students, Faiz and Zaid, for their technical support in hosting the webinar live. Thank you guys so much. I thank the participants from the bottom of my heart to support and appreciate our efforts by practicing. Your questions made the session lively, and I'm sure that madam's answers were able to satisfy your curiosity. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you so much, participants. I also want to thank my partner, Mrs. Namrata Saxena, for her constant support. And last but not the least, the teachers. I thank each and everyone for being there for one another. Our strength lies in our team. Thank you so much, ma'am. And thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Geeta. Yes, and for all the participants, the feedback link will be mailed to you on your registered email ID. Remember to follow us on Facebook. PILLAI College of Education and Research, New Panvel is on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter. The links have been shared on the YouTube. Stay connected for further updates. Thank you, Dr. Annie. Thank you, Dr. Sally Enos. Thank you, all my dear colleagues. Thank you, Faiz. Thank you, Zed. Thank you, Dr. Sukhi, and all the participants. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll wind.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Annie. Thank you so much. Lovely session. One fantastically done, beautifully explained, and especially the question and answer sessions were really great.
Thank you.
We're still live.
Are we out?